Welcome, action fans, and thanks for joining us for another edition of All 90s Action All the Time. As we continue this year's journey through some of the highlights and lowlights of action cinema in 1994. I'm your host, Scott Murphy, and today we're looking at a film that is both a highlight and a lowlight, as this time we are looking at Street Fighter. Alongside me to talk about this one, I have my regular co host. You know who he is. He is a man who, the day he decided to grace this podcast, it was the most important day in my life. But for him, it was just Tuesday. It's Mr. Craig Draheim.
Oh, you got it's the same one I was gonna do for my intro. But hi, hey, nice to be on this one.
For some reason, I knew you were going to choose it, and so
Yeah,
I robbed it from you
I
because
know.
I'm mean like that.
Yeah.
But plus, we have a very, very special guest in the form of the co-host of Is Paul Dano Ok Spotlight and formerly Sudden Double Deep, and a man who would never go home when it's time to kick Bison's ass. It's Mr. Matt Brothers. Welcome, Matt.
Hello, guys. So for me, it is Sunday. A little early in the week. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
After 7 months of fighting, the civil war in Shadaloo may have reached the turning point. The capital has just fallen.
In December 1994, the forces of freedom will face a power-mad dictator in a struggle for the fate of the world.
I'm going to kick Bison's ass.
I don't think so. You'll have to do better than that.
Okay. Now, who wants to go home and who wants to go with me?
On to today's film, which was released on December the 23rd, 1994. It was written and directed by Stephen E. D'Souza, whose other writing credits include 48 Hours, Commando, The Running Man, and Die Hard, making him something of an action movie legend. Critically, it is currently sitting on 11% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 44 reviews, 34 on Metacritic based on 21 reviews. It has a 4.0 on IMDb and a 2.1 on Letterboxd. Box office wise, it made $99.4 million off of a $35 million budget. Or, according to an article that from The Guardian, Stephen E. D'Souza claimed that it made $105 million off a $33 million budget. So, who knows? But anyway, it was the 26th biggest film of 1994, placing it just one above the Meryl Streep and Kevin Bacon thriller The River Wild, and one below Jean-Claude Van Damme's other film of that year, Time Cop. Okay, so that's all your Street Fighter stats for today. So before we get into the movie, I'll just cut to you, Matt, first, and just before we get into Street Fighter at all or Jean-Claude Van Damme, just tell us a little bit about your podcasts. Is Paul Dano okay?
Yeah, thanks very much. So yeah, I do two current shows. The main one from me is Paul Dano Ok. Now, this is a filmography podcast all about the works of Mr. Paul Dano, who me and my co-host Daryl, we realized he was a very interesting guy. You know, he's one of those actors, character actors that a lot of people know, whether they know so or not. They will have seen stuff with him in. He's got a fairly average sized filmography for his 20 plus years he's been in the game, but they're all very, very interesting picks. And something that kind of links them all is his ability to take a punch and get a good beating in most of his films. So we thought, well, let's do the whole lot and see how much he gets abused in every film he's in and kind of rank it in a way. So it became this kind of filmography show mission that we kind of finished after 4 and a bit seasons worth of Paul. But we're gluttons for punishment, and we don't want to kind of end the show. So while we wait for him to desperately make new stuff, and he's not somebody like your Nicolas Cage or your Willem Dafoe who's cast in 3 new things a month. He's been very slow since finishing off stuff like The Fabelmans and Dumb Money. He's got a few things coming up, 2024 and beyond, but not many. So in the sort of interim, me and Daryl were looking at other character actors to do focused down mini seasons on, who fall in that same kind of bracket. So we first did Judy Greer, who, again, very well known on TV and as a great comedian. A lot of her movie roles, she was kind of relegated to sort of the mum or the wife type of role and stuff like Ant-Man or Jurassic World. So we thought, let's go deeper on her as well, pick out some films from nestled within a filmography in which she's the lead, in which she's on the poster, in which she really gets to show off. Then we did Judy Greer. We did Mr. Clancy Brown as well, and we're recently doing, or will have finished by now, Rachel Weisz as our third one. Highlight for us was we'd managed to talk to Clancy Brown himself before Christmas last year, so we got the first kind of main interview in, which was incredible. So one step closer to Mr. Dano and the rest. And by the time this comes out, I think we'll be in the middle of our next season, which is actually the focus of is going to be the result of a listener poll we've put out. So we've put up 6 other new character actors for people to choose from, including people like Jimon Honsu, Keith David, Jeffrey Wright, James Hong, Hiroyo Kusanada, and Tony Shalhoub. So all great picks. I'm very excited to see which one we end up doing. And we kind of cheated a bit because these are all people we would have very happily done a season on. But we thought, let's make this interactive. Let's put it out to the people. And then the other show, which I've been doing slightly longer with my 2 other friends, Liam and Paul, is Spocklight. So this is a Star Trek show from the point of view of 3 non-Trekkies. So this was the pod that kind of got us into podcasting, really. And it was a big excuse for the 3 of us to kind of keep hanging out because they're my 2 best buds. They both live down in Brighton. I'm here in London. It was a good excuse to meet up kind of once a month for some in-person records. So it started off slow, but it's just always carried on. And that was dipping your foot into the Star Trek podcast game. It's a crowded field, and we knew that going in. But we just wanted a film series that was interesting to talk about from the point of view from people who weren't necessarily in that world. So we had different kind of levels of fandom. So I was very much the newbie. Liam was kind of in the middle, and Paul was a bit of a lapsed Trekkie from school, picking it back up. But that film series is very interesting to do, those 13 films, because they are quite famously one good, one bad, one good, one bad. And then once we got to the end of them, at the end of the first year of the show, we just kind of carried on, because obviously there's a million bits of TV content. And kind of around the time we started was when it started to have its big resurgence of all the new shows as well. So we cover all sorts of stuff there, and that's kind of like a monthly pod as well. And then the other one you mentioned, which will tie us neatly back into Street Fighter, was Sun Double Deep, which I also did with my Is Paul Dano Ok co-host Daryl. It was me, him, and his lovely wife Jeanette. Previously, it was those 2 and their friend Ben. I kind of took over during the pandemic as the third host, and that was a triple bill title podcast. So each week we pick a word out of a tin and then watch 3 films that shared that word. And we tried to get a good array of different genres, different decades, different kind of styles of film. And so we did do Street Fighter in our last year of the show, which ended last summer, in a street triple bill. So it was Street Fighter 1994. It was Street Trash from 1987, the real gloopy kind of yucky horror dirty film, and Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, which is the fairly recent documentary about Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 and the lead actor from that. So yeah, there you go, a real sort of array of triple bill there, and it's been very fun to revisit Street Fighter nearly exactly a year on since I would have last rewatched this.
Excellent. I wasn't sure where you were going to go with that third one. I was like, Street Fighter, Street Trash. I was like, oh, maybe Streets of Fire. Man, I thought that's what the direction I thought you were going.
See, there's loads, and I think we had done Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors on a Warriors triple bill not too long ago. So I love the Nightmare film, so I was like, we could easily pick another sequel one of these, but we thought let's go a little deeper and do this doc because that had some real interesting sort of reviews around it.
Yes, that is It is a real, like, for people who have not seen it, it's a real interesting doc. I do find, I do, like, it's interesting how, like, uh, there was all sorts of different levels of knowing going on. Where it's like the writer's like, yes, I'm definitely putting in gay content. Whereas the director, Jack Shoulder's like, gay content? I didn't notice any gay content.
Totally went
It's,
by me. All
Yeah.
this, naked towel whipping in the showers. No, don't know what you mean. Yeah.
But then
it's
the
a
writer,
wacky doc.
the writer almost like flips in the documentary where it felt like, oh no, well, yeah, I was just making these jokes about it, and then it almost seems like at some point he realizes he's gonna be the bad guy. It's like, no, I was trying to bring awareness to this.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating docs like that that kind of look at a very specific moment in film history and how it evolves and stuff. There's another one we really loved was Best Worst Movie.
Oh
Looking at
yeah, the Troll
some of the
2
actors
documentary.
from Troll 2, and it kind of focuses on that guy who plays the dad, who was just like a sort of Midwestern dentist, and that kind of like revived like 10 or 15 years after that film came out, when it started becoming a bit of a cult hit, people discovering it, the age of DVD and the internet and stuff, and then he started doing the tours to the conventions and the screenings, and how that kind of took over his life again and gave him a new burst of energy, and then how that started to eat away at him as well. And yeah, there's some really fascinating docs of these kind of lost stars from the 80s onwards, especially,
Yeah.
to see where people, and hopefully it's not ones that end in tragedy either.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another really fascinating one because again, the director seems oblivious. Like Claudio
Yeah.
Fragasso
Oh, he
really thought he
definitely
was
was.
making
Yeah.
a good film, and he seems very annoyed by that ironic revival of the movie.
Yeah, he had that real sort of Tommy Wiseau approach of like, I don't know what you're talking about. This is a serious film. It's a serious drama. Look at it. And it's like, is this just the Italian English like language barrier? Like, are you not seeing what's funny? Like, and I think someone like Tommy Wiseau of The Room has really, I don't know whether he ever thought this was a real drama, but the way he's leapt onto The Room, oh yeah, it's always meant to be a comedy. Like, I
Yeah.
generally don't think he thought that at the time.
I
But
absolutely
yeah.
agree.
I was gonna bring up that same thing where I think he's saying that he made it purposefully bad now or something because I don't know.
Which
Maybe
must be
just,
really hard and just slowly die inside every time.
yeah.
So the last thing we should do before we get into Street Fighter, because like we've been doing this pod for a couple of years now, but this is the first Jean-Claude Van Damme film we've done. So I just want us all to talk a little bit about any Van Damme fandom we have and how much people know Van Damme, how many Van Damme films people have seen, things like that. So we'll start with you first, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I was born in '86, so the '90s was definitely kind of my decade growing up. And thinking about where good old Jean-Claude fit in, it was probably something like Universal Soldier. I remember seeing that at a real sort of good formative age, like 10 or 11 or something, and being blown away by like its manliness and its ultra violence and the hard sci-fi-ness of it all. And going back and revisiting it, it is really strong. And him and Dolph kind of at the height of their powers. But it's interesting. Recently, me and my co-host Daryl, again, we've been doing something which hasn't been for any podcast reason. It's just something that kind of came out as a way of like, let's watch movies for fun again. And so for the past 2 summers, we've done this, and we've dubbed it White Guy Karate Summer. And again, this does have links to Street Fighter itself, because we were like, there's certain eras of cinema which are really interesting to see. You could look at like the spaghetti westerns of very specific, like mid 60s to early 70s, and the amount of them that were made of that style and in that same location in Spain and everything, and from a handful of directors. And then the Giallo of the 70s and stuff. And there's certain like quite usually highbrow eras of cinema, and then one that's decidedly very not highbrow, quite the opposite, was this era, which we figured was like, it's from the mid to late 80s through to the 90s. And we kind of like made these rules for ourselves in terms of narrowing down what we watch. And it's like sort of white guys with ponytails, and they're American, and they're in jeans, and they're in either like far Southeast Asian locations doing films, or they're over here, or it's Asian filmmakers operating in the States and what they think Americana is like. It's often martial artists first, actors second. So these people who are like becoming poster children for a certain type of martial arts and coolness in the '90s, being led me to lead these films. People like Billy Blanks and Cynthia Rothrock's in there. She's really genuine, actually. This guy called Jalal, what's his name? He's really good. And so we watched sort of maybe 30 or something a couple summers ago, and then another 30 the summer just gone. I imagine we'll do it again this summer. But I've got this letterbox list. There's 60 films deep, and it's just all these films. You've got like all the American Ninjas, you've got all the Blood Fists, you've got Street Knight, Tiger Claws, Lady Dragon, Black Eagle. That's a Jean-Claude Van Damme one.
Yep.
And obviously JCVD kind of features in a lot of these. So I think the ones that started off for us was stuff like Bloodsport, obviously, the No Retreat, No Surrender triple bill, and the Best of the Best saga. And Double Impact's got JCVD as well. So a lot of these do feature Jean-Claude, but he's kind of the biggest star that this kind of era gets, really, unless you really go deep like we have been doing. And we suddenly become the type that when we're watching something really obscure and one of these other really obscure guys pop into it, we're there like Leo pointing at the screen like, oh my God, it's this guy. Like Lauren Avedon. Oh, what a star. But there's a few in there that are sort of like genuine films, you would say, as opposed to just your sort of blockbuster era VHS stuff you'd find. And there was obviously, again, so many of them because this was the boom of the video store era, and it's fascinating to see the sort of stuff that gets put through. But it tickles a real nostalgia as well.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think like I feel very much the same way. I was born in 1985, so I have a similar appreciation and similar relationship with those kind of early 90s kind of martial arts movies and stuff like that. And I was kind of also into martial arts and that as well. So
Yeah.
like
I mean, it's really fascinating watching these actually, and because obviously stuff like Street Fighter, the video game, Street Fighter 2 especially, and Mortal Kombat are kind of coming out in the mid 90s. And the more of these we watched, we're like, it's art imitating life. Like, what's feeding what? Because some of these you're thinking, this must have been a direct reference to for these games and the sort of characters that appear. And then ones that come just afterwards, you think, well, now it's the other way around. And Street Fighter, the movie, is kind of one that's semi-inspired by these type of films, which was then created as a game, which then became this movie, and it's very much snaking its tail. But there's a couple like King of the Kickboxers, I think, is one, and No Retreat, No Surrender 2. These are ones that are like set in these Southeast Asian countries and jump from being like kung fu movies to just action films and full on like military send ups and stuff. And it's very interesting seeing some of the almost cartoonish type of like hench villains and hench characters you get in there that you go, you could be a character in a 2D fighting game of the era. And a lot of them sort of became that in a way. So it's very odd.
It's interesting as well because a lot of the films you're talking about is the exact sort of film that Stephen E. D'Souza decided not to make. So like you know, like your Blood Fists and your Blood Sports and all that, and all the kind of things that are based on the kind of Enter the Dragon tournament format. Which like apparently Stephen E. D'Souza had a conversation with Capcom and was like, I'm not going to make that. I'm going to make like a kind of James Bond style movie instead. I don't know. I think like it might have been more streamlined and we might have had less issues if we just made a tournament movie, but we'll get into that.
Yeah.
Craig,
Okay.
do you have any kind of JCVD thoughts that you want to give the listeners?
So, I mean, this will link to Street Fighter actually as well, is because of my brother and I, we had the games. And so I think Street Fighter ended up being kind of one of the I don't know if it was the first movie that I went and seen in theaters. I can't remember by this point, but or like we rented it right during right after it came out. And so yeah, it was that Time Cop, Double Impact. So he was it's like I know for this show Lambert has kind of been my go-to, but they were the ones that I would seem to watch a lot when we would rent at the video store, of course. And so yeah,
Yes.
so we could
Yes.
get,
Yes. Yeah, I think like we've just been backed into those corners, Craig. It's like Lambert is your chosen champion and Jackie
Yes.
Chan is mine. You know, that's
Yes.
what we've established on the podcast. That's
How did Lambert become such a beloved figure for you, Craig?
I think because of almost the same. I loved Highlander, and then it was just one of those. It started at an early age, so then Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
As one of my favorite characters to play was Raiden, and then I don't think now looking back he's probably the best Raiden, but you know, I I like him. You know, him being himself throughout every movie. But yeah, it just somehow I think a lot of those movies, not to knock it, well, obviously we're going to be knocking them, but they were always you could rent them for like the entire week instead of a night, and it was two for $1 or something, and so it was just easy to rent or re-rent these films and just I got two for the price of, $1 instead of spending five or whatever it costs to rent a new movie and only have it for a night.
As we get into like the kind of Street Fighter talk, I do want to start the conversation with a minor defense. And that minor defense is like reading a lot of the reviews of the time. A lot of them kind of suggest that like this is just a dumb movie, which it is. But they also seem to like kind of linking it back to like our Tommy Wiseau conversation. Tommy and Wiseau and Claudio Fragasso did not know what movies they were making. Stephen E. D'Souza, some of the humor doesn't necessarily work, but he did know what movie he was making. And I do think it was kind of unfairly lambasted for kind of like, this is unintentionally hilarious. Whereas most of the comedy, I would say 90% of the comedy is intentional. Does all of it work? No. But I think Stephen E. D'Souza knew what movie he was making. He wrote Commando. So like, he is making one of those movies. It's both an action movie and kind of a parody of an action movie. Does he get that balance right? We'll discuss that. But yeah, so I think it's kind of unfairly maligned on that level alone. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, I would actually give. You mentioned it earlier about he could have just because of course the games during that time. I think they've added plot to these video games now.
Mhm.
I haven't played them in years, but the games during that time didn't really. I mean, somebody listening might be upset. They didn't really have much plot. It was like you had all these random characters, and each one had a different style, and you fought them. And like Mortal Kombat, what came out in 95?
95, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that did the tournament thing, and it
Yep.
became this huge success. But it very much follows like Liu Kang is the central protagonist, and you kind of have everybody else around. Where I do give it credit in the sense that it honors the game of like everybody's kind of it's almost feels like an ensemble, and yeah, it has in the same way that maybe Super Mario Brothers the 90s version definitely failed that we talked about, but it I do give it credit that it was trying its something, and trying to make like transition to the film world without just being like, oh, here's the game and an exact replica of the game.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's kind of fascinating how the early era of video game movies took, I mean, aside from Mario Brothers, I guess, went in the way of the fighting genre. And it is like such a plotless thing. But in a way, it kind of makes sense because it gives you an instant big cast of characters and you can kind of do what you want. And, I think I joked when we talked about this in some Double Deep, but, I guess Mortal Kombat does have the tournament structure, so that should make a movie really easily, even though that didn't help out the new one. Like the whole film without a tournament, fine. But with Street Fighter, it's like just have fighters fighting in the street, surely, and go from there. So the fact that it did lean into being this whole like, war film in this fictional kind of nation out in the Southeast is kind of what makes me really think of that specific brand of, well, like Bright Summer kung fu movies, but on a bigger scale. And I think as much as I've looking ahead very slightly, like I think my opinion on this film since just last year has already improved slightly, not by much, but I mean, I'm appreciating a lot more now. And I think, like you say, the humor is definitely part of that.
Yeah.
But again, most of it is, I think, just through seeing a film that looks expensive, that was clearly shot on location with real people and stunts. It's something we take for granted these days. And I think this is going to happen more and more with films from the 90s, especially. That I think as we get into more 90s nostalgia, a lot of it is just going to be films looking a certain way, feeling a certain way, having this kind of score and sincerity to it. and then just the general thing of being on location, having real stunts, having real extras, and all sorts of stuff, which you can skirt over so easily now. But yeah, I think this from what it's attempting, it's not the mistake. It's all in the kind of everything else, I guess. The execution, a lot of the casting, but not all of it. And it's a very weird hodgepodge because you watch this and you go, yeah, this is a bad film, but there's something under the surface here. And I think a lot of that, as no doubt we'll get onto, is Raul Julia anchoring the entire thing with this amazing and villain performance. And what he is doing is, as we said, it's like he must also know how funny this is, but my God, is he playing it straight? And it works so well because genuinely some of the hardest villain moments like ever coming from this guy.
I would even add it's with him. All right. So I remember when I was probably in my early 20s, and anybody that watches film, they get to that point where like, oh well, my favorite films are probably Tarkovsky or whatever. You just link some sort of cinephile thing. And I think I made a joke about Street Fighter, and I had a friend who defended it, but he did it in a way that wasn't just like pure nostalgia, whatever it may be. But he specifically talked about Julia of being like, no, there's like, yeah, sure, it's bad, but like with him, like, I know there's the story that he did it for his grandchildren because they were fans of the game.
Yeah,
And then
that's right.
but yeah, he's like in that scene where he does what you quoted, Scott, the
Oh
it was
yeah,
just a
for the
Tuesday.
day
It's like
Bison graced your village
yeah.
was the most important day of your life, but for me it was just Tuesday. Yeah, which
Yes.
it's a great line.
Yeah. And so his whole argument was like, no, if you just look at it from his performance alone, it should be honored just how great of an actor he was, that you know he was able to kind of take this movie and up its scale, by his
Yeah,
performance.
and I
You
think
can
like
picture him. You can. Oh, go on, Scott.
oh no, I was just going to say quickly that like he improved the movie as well, not just from his performance, but like apparently he improvised some of his lines. Like one of the lines that cracks me up the most when watching this movie is apparently improvised from Raul Julia, we realize that Guile, who is supposedly dead, we're skipping way ahead into the movie, who's supposedly dead, is alive. And then he just goes, "Of course!" And then, and then he explains why Guile is still alive. And he turns around to Sagat and he just goes, "Oh, or did you just not see that one coming?" And just because he's got an eye patch. I've just covered my eye. Well, this is an audio format. This joke doesn't work so well, but it's a good line, and I was impressed at the improvisation there.
He's so good. You can imagine him like, between takes, trying to like, let me understand this Bison guy. Let me get into his head. And you can see that come through because, this is a villain, the classic villain who thinks he's doing the right thing. He has that whole speech about like, I'm not doing this for evil. I'm gonna just wrap the world in a fist of bison and everything will be better off, while he's, trying to work out where best to put the food courts on his evil empire map. Like, it's so camp, but so straight. And that whole for me, it was Tuesday scene. Like, everything about it is great. Like Chun-Li's entire impassioned speech about her father, the way Bison's just strolling around with his little cocktail shaker. It's just everything that we could see and hear simultaneously is perfect, right down to the final delivery. And so, yeah, he is going like boggle-eyed mad. And I think you touched on it earlier that it's almost weird if we don't get more between him and Jean-Claude himself, as they are by nature of the movie kind of very separate. But I remember being really like sort of annoyed when this started last time I watched this, and being like, this isn't Street Fighter. Like, we see him take on a couple of sort of military guys at the start, and they get to fight him, and he just breaks their necks within a second. I'm like, that's Mortal Kombat. This isn't Street Fighter. Where's the like, throw down and the slow mo KO and everything, and it doesn't really attempt to ever claw that back. But I will say, like, a lot of the characters, there are some that are perfect. Like Vega, I think is perfect. That actor's physique and the look is great. Sagat as well. And then unfortunately, I think it's just majorly let down by the Ryu and Ken of it all. played by those guys,
Uh,
Damien
Damien
Chapa
Chapa
and
and Byron
Byron
Mann.
Mann, who just look like, I don't know, that there's somebody else's agent who's just walked on set, like they don't have much presence, bless them. But as a pair, actually, they're kind of quite fun.
But,
But it's like this is where the whole film should have been built around, surely.
this is so I was a big Ryu fan of the game, and which I think all the animated movies he's kind of the central character.
Yeah, he is.
But I remember one of the reasons watching it for that. Yeah, definitely rewatching it now. It felt like, besides Van Damme or those that already had an established career by that point, like, oh, you have all these actors that were probably told, like, man, this is going to be like, you're going to explode after this movie, and then you don't really see any of them again. But that's how it feels, like all these kind of young people that you don't really know their face too well, and then
Yeah, I think
high hopes. Yeah.
I mean, probably they did like have high hopes. I like for sure because like you say, they're kind of young actors, and then Byron Mann has like been like supporting. He's in like a lot of direct-to-video action movies. He has made a kind of career for like which it like kind of reading into the background of the movie. It almost surprised me that he wasn't like a martial artist turned actor. It was like the other way around because he's been
That
in
would
so
make
many
sense, yeah.
direct-to-video action movies. And I think like Damien Chapa. I think like he was going to be a thing, or people planned to make him a thing or something because like the year before this, he was in like a kind of gangster epic called Blood In, Blood Out, which is I've not seen, but apparently is kind of a cult favorite of some people. And that was in '93, and then this in '94, and then he's really done not a lot since. I think he's done kind of a lot of kind of direct to video stuff and that kind of stuff. But none of them kind of went very far. I do think, like in terms of some of the casting, unfortunately was thrust upon them. Particularly like the character that is probably the weakest character in the whole film is there is a minor character called Captain Sawada, who was originally going to be Capcom because the guy who played him, Kenya Sawada, was like a relatively big actor in Japan. Capcom wanted him to play Ryu, but he could speak very, very little English. Okay. And as you can tell in the film, his English is quite broken. And Stephen E. D'Souza was like, we can't have him playing Ryu. So they were like, yeah, but we want him in the movie. So he wrote like a new character just to kind of so it sounds like it was quite a difficult writing process because like I think Stephen E. D'Souza had like certain characters in mind of who he wanted to focus on, and Capcom kept coming back to him, being like, "Yeah, but can we have this character from the game? And this character's missing." And like, so like, it wasn't written under the best circumstances.
That makes sense too, because he has. It feels like he has more of the physique than the person that played Ryu.
Byron Mann. Byron Mann's kind of bulked up, and like when you see him in the 2010s, like he looks more like Ryu than he does in 1994. Yeah, for sure. I don't know, like what were some of your other kind of favorite and least favorite characters? I would say in terms of some of the people we've not mentioned so far, I think as much as apparently she is a lovely, lovely person, everybody loved her on set. I was not a big fan of Kylie Minogue's performance in the movie, and but I was a big fan of Zangief's performance, the guy who played Zangief. I think he's hilarious throughout the movie. I think all of his lines are hilarious and hilariously delivered. So that's a couple for me. Like Matt,
yeah, it's hilarious because it feels like I remember watching this again and thinking like, if this was made today, it'd be a whole movie before these characters become the video game characters you recognize them as. And it kind of like rapid fire gives you like 10 of them in the first 5 minutes. But actually, like a lot of the stuff that happens to him does end up making them more like the video games towards the end. Obviously, Blanca, he has a kind of film-long transformation. But Dhalsim as well, the scientist randomly getting his hair burnt off and becoming like you recognize. And then Sagat getting a big scar down his chest. So there are little moments that do make them more like the video games as it goes on. But for the beginning, it is just kind of like, yeah, here's this guy. Why wait around? Let's get into it. But maybe you're on shaky ground straight away when like you see Chun-Li, Balrog, and E Honda, and they're all journalists, and you're like, what is this? And at least it does kind of turn around again and say, we did have our video game careers that we kind of got pushed out of through Bison, but to begin with, you're just like, are we just retconning all these guys into whatever wild story this is? But I do appreciate the speed at which they kind of rattle through, and it is funny how Guile ends up feeling the least connective to many. He's definitely like the lead of this thing, but like you say, he feels very much in a vacuum.
Yeah. No, I agree with the kind of the journalist thing, because watching it, there's only really the one line later on. It's almost towards the midpoint or after of the movie where like, oh well, I was the sumo wrestling champ, and then I was the box. It's like, oh yeah, we need to add in something that tells them that
it's
they're
like
fighters.
later on in the movie when they're captured. That's kind of, I think that kind of comes.
And they start to get their more game accurate outfits. Balrog's just in his little boxing getup and stuff, and occasionally, like, did you guys find all the the move set? Because we do get some direct references to the moves. A lot of the times it's very lazy, but it would just be a bit of like Honda doing a lot of rapid fire slapping, and I think Ryu Ken does a very sort of lazy big uppercut. But there are a few more specifics in there. But it's like, lean into this. This is what we want.
Yeah, Ryu does without shooting the energy ball, he does like the Hadouken thing where he like hits Vega with both of his palms, and then they do a flash of light. And then but then it's kind of doesn't give a full thing where he does like the spinning kick, but the way they have the camera placed, you don't really see the full like spin and all of its glory or something. I don't know. But I'd agree.
Because there's Guile. Guile has a couple of backflip scissor kicks, but no sonic booms. Bison attempts his big electric spinny thing, but doesn't spin. But I guess he flies across the room. That's it. Maybe that's like as far out there as they get once Bison starts levitating everywhere.
I think so.
Because it definitely seems like they were trying to, like, he wanted to ground it so much in realism, but then you have this game where they can shoot energy balls or do all this stuff that is fantastic. Well, where even with Bison they had to explain the electromagnetic technology that would suggest why he can do what he can do.
I think like with in terms of the fights and stuff, I mean, I think it would have been kind of cool if they went into the kind of fantastical stuff, the kind of fireball shooting, the energy ball shooting, all that kind of stuff. And I do think that the fights might have been better if, like, almost if Van Damme hadn't been hired on the movie, because apparently what happened was basically Stephen E. D'Souza's plan was he hired the kickboxer Benny the Jet Urquidez, who's done fight choreography for a bunch of Hollywood films and is probably best known, I think, for his scene where he fights John Cusack in Grosse Pointe Blank. I think that's maybe his most famous on-screen fight, but he's done like a bunch of fight choreography work. And his plan was that there was going to be like a 6-week training camp before filming started, to kind of get everybody up to speed, because most of these people weren't martial artists. So the fights looked real good. Unfortunately, that didn't happen because they hired Jean-Claude Van Damme and he cost a lot. And then they hired Raul Julia and he cost a lot and ate too much into the budget. So they just had to learn all the fights choreography basically on set pretty much the day they were doing the fights. So that's why a lot of the fights look pretty ropey.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, none of them are really shot that dynamically or feel anything much more than a bit of a scrap. But none of them really have that really spotlight either to kind of for anyone to really show off. Like, you kind of get Ryu versus Vega in the sort of cage at the start, which is like close to an actual level of the game, actual stage. But yeah, nothing ever really builds and has much stakes in and of itself. Like, this is a film that is very strangely paced. It kind of has this very energetic beginning, a tiny bit of middle, and then like a 45-minute climax. Like, the entire almost second half of this film is the final act, and it's just very strange when you think of it like that, because everything from the attack on Bison's HQ onwards, it is only about halfway in or abouts, and that is where it gives it lots of time to breathe with all the moving parts and everything. But it's just a very odd thing. There's no kind of like, they attempt one thing and get knocked back. There's a real low point. We climb up again. It's not really structured like any sort of normal film.
I had kind of forgot that, like just how kind of weirdly structured it is. And
Yeah.
like that speech where Jean-Claude Van Damme makes his kind of like, we're going to kick Bison's ass kind of speech, that comes 47 minutes into the film, which is bizarre.
The whole "you can all go home," but that was an issue, I guess, in the sense for me where I don't know. I think what Matt was saying too of the Vega Ryu one is basically broken up before they even get into it, and then when it hits its final, you have Guile and Bison, and then you have Hoda and I'm forgetting his name now. Who does he fight?
Who does, which fight are we talking about?
Just by the end, you really only have Ryu, Vega, Ken, Sagat,
and E
Bison,
Honda and
yes.
Zangief.
Yes, those are and then I don't know, you have all these other characters where you'd think, but again, that's then way too many characters. But you don't get the whole, like with Mortal Kombat, for example, where it splits off. You kind of have this person fighting this person, and you get a whole nice fight that happens and watching it. And
but yeah, I get what you mean. You're only getting like these little glimpses of the fight.
Yeah.
But like, it's weird because you are only getting these little glimpses, but those fights seem to last forever. The kind of the Bison Guile, Ken, Sagat, Ryu, Vega, and Zangief Honda. Those 4 fights, like, they're both kind of unsatisfying, unsatisfyingly short in some ways, but also way too long.
Yeah. Because it cuts around so much that like they even see the video where they make the Godzilla joke.
Yeah,
which is good. Good.
But by that point, you're like, oh yeah, they're still fighting, aren't they? And then you like see them later on after what feels like several scenes where they end their fight, and again you get that same, oh yeah, they're smashing through walls fighting. That's what they've been doing this whole time.
Well, that's it. I guess there's no like definitive winner of any fight really. They either get interrupted or it just stops or it ends. And that's it. They could have had so much more fun in leaning into the game tropes, like as somebody all bloody and beaten and be like, oh, as a countdown goes on, like, will you fight again, kind of thing. I mean, they lean into the easy stuff, like Bison shouting "game over" and things like that. But having real, that's it. Without real consequences of any individual fight, it just becomes a big military versus megalomaniac story with individual participants within that. But it's all about the big thing rather than the micro. So it's a shame. It's tough. Like, I'm very intrigued as to what you could do now. Actually, have you guys seen any of the other media post this? Because there's been animes, hasn't there, in the Chun-Li movie and anything else?
So yeah, I mean, like, I remember actually the very first time I saw this movie was I actually saw it in a double bill with the animated film that was released in the same year, which is better. But like, I think I've seen one of the other kind of animated films post that and post the making of this one, and also, I've seen Street Fighter: The Legend of Chun-Li, which is way worse. Like it's got only a slightly worse score on IMDb. It's got 3.7 out of 10 instead of 4.0, but it's way worse. And I guess like it's also, I prefer this era of cinema. And like, obviously we've got this 90s action podcast, but like the way it looks, it's kind of over the top. It's got kind of, that over the top production design. It's kind of glossy and stuff like that. Whereas The Legend of Chun-Li was released in 2009, which is kind of that late 2000s period of action cinema, is amongst my least favorite periods of action cinema, because my feeling is from the mid 2000s to the kind of early 2010s, everybody took the wrong lessons from the Bourne
Yeah.
trilogy and the Nolan Batman trilogy. And, it's just like, oh, we'll make everything look dark and everything will look kind of grey and broody and everybody will look broody and everybody will growl their lines. And it just, oh God, it's the most. I hate it. I hate every part
Yeah.
of it. So
It's that complete lack of that complete lack
Yeah.
of clarity, isn't it? In just what you can see, what you can hear, like basic stuff. And this is what I was saying earlier about this era of 90s stuff. It's you kind of take that for granted because, people used to know how to, light night scenes back
Yes.
in the day.
yes.
Like, you look at Batman Returns, that whole thing is at night and you can see everything.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, and another like mini bugbear with more modern stuff. But you're right, that kind of like mid to late 2000s into early 2010s is some rough periods because that's when you get like the resurgence of 3D as well. And if anything's big budget enough to have the 3D conversion, it just looks like garbage water. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
The children yearn for 1994 Steven D'Souza Street Fighter.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like literally, I mean, I dare anybody to go and watch Street Fighter, this Street Fighter, and then go and watch like the Street Fighter Legend of Chun Li or the Tekken movie, which was released in the same
Ooh.
year. Garbage. Like this, like if anybody watches this and thinks that this is the worst movie I've ever seen, then they need to check out those movies because boy are they in for a rough ride.
Well, I know because I mean, I haven't seen the newest one, but even with the Mortal Kombat remake thing, I watched they did it, but I guess it kind of works with Mortal Kombat in the sense of the style. But when they did the web series and they tried to make Mortal Kombat like more grounded in realism,
Mm-hmm.
and then but that again was very dark, and I think this remake is supposed to be very darkly shot and all of that as well. If I'm
Yeah, well, Mortal Kombat's a wild one because it's like, this is the blur and oasis of the time of what you are. And it's funny how the Mortal Kombat movie comes along a year later and kind of smashes it. Like, also not great, especially not the second one, but that first one is the sort of pinnacle of like 90s video game films for me. And it feels and looks a lot of the same way. But nails the sort of character design and the fights and the tournament, everything you kind of want in that film. And the new one really did sort of anger me and Daryl because we were really looking forward to it. Like, how do you mess this up? And first clue was that they messed up the iconic theme tune, that main track, the remix or whatever. I think it's in the trailers. Can't remember if it's in the film, but it's just awful. It's like, oh, and then it's like, yeah, oh no, they've gone really po-faced with it, and they kind of lean into making it this epic generational story about Scorpion and Sub-Zero. And you've got the amazing Hiroyuki Sanada as Scorpion, amazing. And the little prologue with them in the past, genuinely great. And then it just doesn't know what to do. It's like they bring in this brand new character who's like the lead, who's just this beige plank of wood. And it's like, you have this incredible roster. What are you doing? And then it just farts about with some training and some guff about how you get your powers. And then it kind of ends. And it's like, there wasn't even, it's so annoying. But anyway, there's a second one coming. Hopefully they lean into the fun a bit more because that's what I think films are slowly getting back to. But
I agree.
Yeah, I was always more Street Fighter than Mortal Kombat in the game sense, at least. But Killer Instinct was the one that's my jam.
That was a great game. I love that.
That was my favorite.
I have to say, I absolutely agree with you on the new Mortal Kombat movie.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, prologue, great, Hiroki Sanada, great. And I was like, yeah, this is going to be my jam. And then it went into that kind of what I can only call Zack Snyder self-seriousness that is like my least favorite thing an action movie can do. It's like, because I think like when people think of like pretentious, people seem to think of like Ingmar Bergman or Andrew Tarkovsky or something like that. When I think of pretentious, I think of Zack Snyder, who makes dumb movies in the most pole-faced fashion you've ever seen. But anyway, I'll move on from that.
But I know it also run kind of the negative. I don't know. I took the gamble of it with the remake, where everything is so geared towards the franchise element of like, okay, so we can't actually have the tournament in this movie.
Yeah,
we have to wait until whatever second, third. We have to do some big build and make a multiverse. But I think people are getting tired of that too. episode.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that kid gets killed off because the whole let's build a franchise before we've even got one big hit. It's like I would welcome a franchise where every time a film is made, they're like, we're putting our all into this. This is it, and it ends. And then if that does well, we'll do another one. And that just very much went the way of the dodo, I think, once the MCU kind of took off. And yeah, you're right. You see it in that new Mortal Kombat. It's like, oh, we'll save the real Mortal Kombat for the second one. It's like, what are you doing? But but yeah, like bring back the era of just like, here's what you think you're getting. Here it is, but in like a surprising way, in an artistic way. And it's funny because I think the guys who made Talk to Me are doing a new Street Fighter. So I'm intrigued by that because did you see Talk to Me, either of you guys?
Yes, yeah. I saw that. You know, I was
feels like those guys kind of get it. I think they came up in like YouTube stuff as well. So if they can just lean in and like do something really fun, like just make it where it's like, someone like Ken can do like a triple round kick in levitating off the air, and you can do Hadoukens. Like, don't explain everything. Don't try and I think you're right. I think that's the other thing that Batman Begins has to answer for, is the way of every little thing needs an explanation of like where it came from and how. And it's like, no, just be like, here's a guy who has fire uppercuts. Like, why? Doesn't matter. That's what he does. And you know that because you played the games.
I think like people are getting a little bit fed up of like both those things. Like the kind of like every little thing needs to be explained, the backstory of it and all that. I think like even with like the things like films like Solo kind of flopping and stuff like that, and people being like, yeah, no, like we don't care, we don't care. Han Solo is Han Solo. We don't need to know like how he got there, and we don't need to know every little detail about every line he said in the original Star Wars or whatever. So I think people are kind of getting fed up with that, and also the kind of this overextending things, just everything, every kind of final movie in a franchise now has to be 2 parts or 3 parts, or like, and all this kind of just overextending things just for the sake of overextending things, just to kind of grind more money out of us. I think people are kind of coming to their senses and being like, it was fun that the MCU was interconnected because it reminded me of my childhood and how comic books work like that. But not everything needs to work like that. Not everything. There doesn't need to be a monster verse. You can just make fun monster movies. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. We don't care.
Yeah. What I did notice during this conversation is, we haven't actually take any sort of dive into the plot.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Like,
should we do a rapid fire of?
Well, I guess we'll get in. Yeah, we'll get into a kind of wrap up. This is the things I should do at the start of the episode. So Matt, just in case you were just thinking, they're just poor podcasters. There's this sloppy podcasters. We used to structure the podcast differently. We used to go through the plot of a movie kind of beat by beat. So we didn't need this plot synopsis at the start of the episode because we go through the whole plot. From beginning to end, from A through Z. But we don't do that now. We kind of dance about. We change the structure of the podcast. But I keep forgetting to do the plot synopsis since changing the format. So I guess like it's pretty much a kind of simple or kind of war movie almost. We've got this guy, Bison, who is the leader of this nation, dictator of this nation, Shadaloo, which is an fictional Asian nation that looks a lot like Thailand. And we've got like a peace force that are called the Allied Nations, who are obviously based on the UN. And but they work kind of differently from the UN because they seem like a invading force. But anyway, it doesn't matter. We don't need to delve too far into the logic. Guile is the head commander of the unit that's stationed in Shadaloo, and he has a personal vendetta against Bison. And we're introduced to various other characters who also have personal vendettas against Bison, as we've also mentioned, Chun-Li, Balrog, E-Honda. Ken and Ryu don't have a personal vendetta against Bison, but they exist in another storyline where they are kind of not gun runners. They're kind of pretend gun runners where they try and con people out of
Seems
money.
dangerous.
Yeah, it does seem dangerous. They're kind of conning
Selling
gangsters.
toy guns to people and expecting to walk out with a briefcase full of money. Sure.
Well, apparently they've done it before, but this is the first time they got caught. It seems like they've done this for maybe a few years. I don't know how they came up with this plan, but like, yeah.
So they're
that sees them
basically
jailed alongside Sagat and Vega, and then they are convinced to go undercover to try and get into Bison's headquarters, which doesn't really seem to be a major plot point because they end up just invading anyway. But they have to because his hideout is they don't know the location, so they found out the location from them going undercover, and then they just invade, and then basically because, like I mentioned, Guile's speech where he says, I'm going to go and kick Bison's ass. That comes 47 minutes into the film. And then the entire second half of the film is the third act, which you're like, when it happens, you're like, oh, we're in the third act already. And then you check the time and you're like, oh, it must be like over an hour into the film, And it's like, no, we've just got the second act barely exists. And then we're just all final act. So, and that's kind of the roundup of the structure and plot of the film. Where we can talk about more kind of specific plot points. You can kick us off, Craig, specific plot points you might want to talk about.
I do enjoy the weird opening that so Bison is watching television most of the time, which is talking about himself, and Guile, even though he's just a colonel in this Peace Force, he's almost treated like a celebrity. Like everybody knows who Guile is. And then they talk to each other through kind of the television signal, almost like wrestlers. I wanted to say
yes.
Somehow
he does very much
WWE.
Jean-Claude very
I'll
much does
see you at WrestleMania.
Yeah. And he even does the flex and the American flag. And but yeah, that's what
it's crazy because
he was one let me tell you this brother away from being like
yeah.
It's mad because this film is almost missing an entire first act because I kind of admire the audacity of when it starts. They've Bison and Guile clearly have some sort of history. We don't know what it is. Yeah, why is Guile this like super famous military colonel guy? We don't know. And it's like they've got this grudge already. And Bison really is painted in this film as basically a Bond villain, isn't he? Because he's got his lair, he's got his kind of logo on stuff, he plans for world domination. But I'm still not sure what his giant threat was. I watched this like 3 hours ago. I've already forgotten. Like, did he have a giant laser or something? Because he's kind of demanding this $20 billion ransom. But did he have a threat behind that? Or was he just like, because I'm Bison, and if you don't, I'll do Bison stuff?
So he had hostages.
Hostages.
But then it even comes out later on that the other nations didn't like him, but then corporations did. So it's like there's parts where you're watching it where you're kind of sitting there going, oh yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, why?
This is almost making some prescient points about the state of the world. Like someone who has capitalism on his side, but law against it. It's like, oh yeah, you could maybe get up to a lot of no good. But it's like he makes a jibe about kidnapping the Queen of England at some point, doesn't he? And some other like specific nation-based stuff.
But nothing seems, I don't know, like very bad guy-esque in terms of, I don't know, especially during that time asking $20 billion, and you see the amount of hostages that they have. Like,
they must have been super celebrity hostages, much like Guile. He's just kidnapped a bunch of celebrity soldiers, and then
but he just wants.
And yeah, Bison. I don't know. I think the easy shorthand way for what he often comes across me this is Hank Scorpio from The Simpsons, which is the Bond villain analogy, but with a bit of a comedic twist. And it is so funny because he is playing it so straight. And he rattles off lines like, "You still refuse to accept my godhood? Keep your own god. In fact, this might be a good time to pray to him, for I beheld Satan as he fell from heaven like lightning." And it's just, you could put that on a t-shirt, man. It's like, this is classic villainy. But it's also very funny.
Well, I would even say it's strange. watching this now, and again, based on everything that's been happening around the world, because you have this peace army in quotes, I guess, and you're kind of like, huh, this, and after Iraq or whatever has happened since this movie was made, like this kind of feels like it was just another one of those examples where you have these superpowers like putting their pressure on a small country, and then somebody kind of rising up and becoming the people's hero, and doing, I don't know, that's what Bison, some weird mix is. Like he almost is done a way where you could then sympathize with him, and they're like, no, 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 he's supposed to be the bad guy. Let's throw in some more
Yeah.
stuff to make you realize how bad he is.
Yeah.
Because you
Well,
never really get much of a sense of like it's the people who have risen with him, except for that one joke almost actually when DJ's running off for the money at the end and Zangief is like, "You're getting paid."
Yeah.
So it's almost like either he's just like an idiot henchman, or he was someone who kind of was recruited to the cause and thought this was a big political movement as opposed to a job. So,
not to take this movie too seriously, but like you were kind of mentioning like Iraq and stuff like that. But like I guess like the 90s were a very different place,
Yes.
in terms of the like political landscape. So particularly in the kind of the kind of Clinton kind of Blair era, that there was like a positivity around Western interventionism, because of like the conflicts in like Bosnia and Kosovo and stuff like that. So I think like there was much more positivity around that. Kind of it's a very 90s specific thing. It was a very there's not a lot of positivity around that before the 90s, not a lot of positivity around that after the 90s, but like very much in the 90s it was like, oh, we can intervene in a good way. And it was like, yeah, well, turns out that didn't last long.
it would almost be the funniest twist, as if Steven D'Souza turned around and said, or I'd never admit this to anybody, but I was actually trying to make a straight comedy. My directing was so bad it came out halfway in between. Because you read half these lines just written down, and they're so funny. Because looking at the IMDb quote section, I mean, maybe this is just their little flourish here, but it's got like Colonel Guile, then in brackets, to the citizens after crashing into a building of his tank, you're all under arrest. It's like this is some Naked Gun level stuff.
Yes, that's part of my thinking while watching it, was that it's
like if these were comedic actors, would they be leaning into this? Whereas
If they
Claude does
really,
not seem to have a sense of humor.
if they really lent into it, if they really were, because it's kind of halfway between like being like a proper good action movie. It's maybe a bit campy and a bit cheesy, but like a proper good action movie, and like a full-on parody. And it's not quite action-packed enough to be a good action movie, because the kind of some of the sloppiness and the kind of fight choreography and the way it's shot and stuff like that. And it's not quite funny enough to be like a kind of Hot Shots or whatever, so, and it sits in this kind of awkward, weird kind of middle place. You're like, I don't quite know. And so I can kind of understand where the critics were coming from, because it is a little confusing as to like, what am I supposed to feel in each scene?
Well, I think too, what ends up happening is because, especially during that time period with video games being very much like this is a kid's thing.
Yeah.
That's what it's like you have somebody that almost to make a full action movie, but oh yeah, remember this is for kids. So, and then the tone obviously doesn't work at all, because they're like trying to make, as you've already talked about, both of you, like how do you make a kids friendly movie about basically a war?
Yeah. But the guy playing DJ is definitely playing it as like that comedic part. He's almost like the Benny in The Mummy, before The Mummy.
Yes.
Because again, it's like, again, looking at this quote on the thing, I remember this bit where Bison's going, defeat is a possibility, very well, we shall face it together, DJ, with the stoicism of the true warrior. DJ quietly leaves as Bison continues to stare at the screen.
Yeah.
It's just sneaking out that. And that bit when
Yeah.
like whatever Zangief says, and then DJ slowly just turns to look at him as the scene ends. It's like he's playing into that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it would have been quite interesting to, as much as we said, people are fed up about like hearing the origins of each and everything. It would have been quite interesting to see how Bison kind of recruited some of these people, because there is a line that DJ says where he says, should have never quitted my job at Microsoft."
Yeah.
And like, I just love to picture the scene of like Bison grandly entering the offices of Microsoft and then trying to recruit people to his evil plan.
It's clearly been a mix of like successes in that sense, but then Dalsim, he does just have fully kidnapped. So it's like, I will kidnap you to make my freakish lab experiments, but some people I have genuinely tempted over with good salary and benefits.
But what's interesting too is he talks about like the money with DJ, but then there's other points that seem like his money's worthless, where it's like Sagat, he offers Sagat why don't you run the country with me? He's like, no, I'll take the money. But then his money is,
The
worthless
Bison
because
dollars,
Yeah, Bison dollars.
That's generally one of the funniest running gags
Yeah.
throughout the whole thing. Like, I love the idea of this megalomaniac guy who's obsessed with the idea of his currency being the one, and everyone else just being like, this is trash. What is this? And it keeps going all the way through to the money they steal at the end is Bison dollars, and they're like, God damn it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do feel like there's like an arc that we don't see. Like, because like the way DJ talks about the money, it looks like he was being paid in like actual like US dollars at some point. And like, so Bison has gone from being like a half crazed, like kind of leader of like a drug cartel to like a full tilt crazed, like, I am now think I'm a god and everybody's going to live under my rule and, have my currency and all this kind of stuff. So I think there's like an arc there that that a kind of off-screen arc that we haven't been a part of.
Yeah, his rise from petty street criminal to cartel lord to wannabe dictator. And it is such a shame, R.I.P. Raul Julia, that this iconic last part for him. But they even have that post-credits tease of Bison coming back, which I read they left out of the theatrical release in Remembrance, but then put it back in for the video stuff, which is an even weirder way round of doing it. In other words, it's like you now know he's definitely gone. So, but the idea of if he had not passed away and getting a sequel to this made somehow with Raul Julia back as Bison, it could have given us so much more good stuff. Or even if they did decide to make one anyway and they recast, whether we would have learnt more about that, or could it have gone even further? Because it felt like, if anything, this would have been the one to have him go from drug cartel to wannabe dictator, and then the sequel to, as it hints at, he's properly going after world domination now. So I don't quite know where you go, but that would have been something.
I wonder if like back in those days, in terms of like executives, like critics meant more, because like I just feel like there's definitely grounds for a sequel. I mean, this movie made like 3 times its budget, so it's in profit in theaters, and then by the time it goes to video, it'd be well in profit, And so it could definitely be made, and lots of other movies get made, particularly look into the 2000s, like none of the Transformers movies are well reviewed, but like they keep getting sequels and stuff like that. So it's interesting that Capcom were so put off by the kind of critical reaction and the kind of, I guess like there was fan reaction as well, but again, I feel like that's like the minority, that like there's still like an audience. You've clearly proved that there is an audience for this film, even if like most people don't think it's a great film.
This is pre-internet enough that there's not going to be, the groundswell of the hardcore fans kicking up, release the Snyder Cut stuff for this. Yeah. So any bad word of mouth coming from the fans would have just been hard to get a big pitch and, a hold on. But it's crazy. It says on Wiki that it wasn't until 2003 that plans were being made for a sequel, and they almost got Van Damme, Dolph Lundgren, and Holly Valance, who I think is in that Tekken film instead.
I think
Definitely the
she's.
Dead or
I,
Alive film.
I think she's in the Dead or Alive film.
Hmm.
It's amazing the amount of bad video game adaptations I've seen. Apparently,
But
um,
well, even with even if it wasn't a theatrical release, yeah, it's
mhm.
even movies that didn't do well
Yeah,
financially,
yeah.
they would get
This was
like
the
the
era.
straight to video,
That's
something.
true. I mean, there's like 8 Bloodfist films. Like
Yeah.
like.
But I know the same thing happened with what Nintendo and the Super Mario Brothers movie, where
Mhm.
they just kind of went,
Hmm.
okay, this didn't do well, let's not, or critically or
Yeah,
any of
maybe it
that.
was like
So
because
let's not, yeah.
Nintendo was so like quality control, weren't they?
Yeah.
Heavy. I wonder if Capcom were
Mhm.
just like, "What have you done?
Yeah.
You will not be doing another one."
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think like it took like a long time. They just did kind of animation after that, It's like that was the only thing they were interested in.
Yeah,
So
looking at that now, 1995 animated series ran for 2 seasons, 26 episodes, which did follow on from the movie in the
Oh,
sense that it carried on Blanca's identity, Dhalsim being a scientist, things like that. So that would be
okay.
something wild.
I know the only one I've seen is, I'm not sure if it was the one released with where Ryu's the main character and then Ken turns evil because of Bison, and that's basically the plot. The other characters kind of come in here and there, but it's basically Ryu versus Ken, and I couldn't tell you which one it's actually called. I just know it's one of the animated Street Fighter movies.
yeah, right, right. I can't remember. It's so long ago since I've
Yeah.
seen any of the Street Fighter animated movies that I can't remember the plot of each
Yeah.
at all. Yeah. Yeah. So have I the only one who like slogged through the Legend of Chun Li? Is that it's like
I
on
think
an
so.
island of my own there?
Yeah, I have not
Oh.
reached those depths yet.
Yeah, no, don't watch it. Don't
Curiosity has
watch it.
pulled me in, but no.
Uh,
It was still in
what's
the era where we're still trying to make Chris Klein a thing. So like it was to the
well,
tail end of that era. I feel
yeah. Well, now I think he's doing all the like Hallmark type
Is that what is
movies
this
now.
what Chris Klein's up to nowadays?
Yeah,
Okay,
he's entered that world. But
okay.
um no, what I think what actually I was surprised made me burst out laughing, and this is one of the non-intentional parts,
Uh-huh.
is the end of the movie where they all think Guile is dead, obviously because the spoiler alert, I guess the building blows up, which is a huge buildup throughout the whole movie. Um, but you see everybody there and they're all in their costumes and they're all acting like really sad and and it just seems like this really drawn out movie. You're like, most of you don't know. Like, there's only like two people in this whole group that actually know Guile, but it's like they're all acting like they've gone through this journey together and they
Well, it's
formed
because he's
some
such a famous
camaraderie.
celebrity that
Yeah, I
everybody
know.
knows like his accomplishments, everything he's ever done. Like everybody's just a big Guile fan.
Yeah. And then when he comes, like reveals that he's not dead, it's like he has a moment with each and every he goes down the line having a moment with each and every one of them until they have the what basically the photo shot where Van
The
Damme
photo
is
shot and
flexing and yeah.
actually, I do want to I can't let the podcast end without mentioning this. So there's twice in the movie where we think Giles dead. Right at the end where he's been blown up, and kind of roughly in the middle where he gets shot by Ken in a kind of staged attack. And there is a bit where Chun Li breaks into the building and Guile is lying under a cover in the morgue. Now, usually I don't get into the logic of action movies because it's nonsense and I accept this and, just enjoy, kind of like the fight choreography and the things I enjoy about action movies. But this really stuck in my mind. I was like, did he know Chun Li was going to be there? Why would he stage himself in the morgue like that? How many hours has he been in the morgue like that? Like it really became quite kind of obsessed with this kind of scene of like, oh, it's so confusing though.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Does anybody have any answers or any potential
he's just there
answers?
giggling like, I can't wait for her to turn up. This is gonna be so funny.
Because so he gets shot and it's like midday at least by the lighting. She is able to give a report, all this stuff, and then when she comes, like breaks in, it's nighttime. You're like, so he's been laying there for at least several hours just under that sheet. Like, he didn't
But
even need to
it's
do
not,
that.
yeah, it's not like he's been knocked out by anything. Like he's just pretending. So no
Yeah.
other doctor wheeling him around has been like, "This guy is alive. What are
Yeah.
you doing?" Even if you were unconscious, you'd be able to tell.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's like if Chun Li hadn't turned up, would he just be like, "I'll just nap here till morning and get up, I guess." But I need to do this reveal.
Yeah.
Definitely to Chun Li and not the audience. Yeah.
And it's a private area, so it's not like regular passerby people would be, you know, could walk by and glance in and be like, "Oh, wait, where's his body at?" It's
Yeah.
in a basement or something.
Yeah,
I
Chun Li
mean,
could have just been like, "Well, that's it for him, I guess. I'll do a news report at the funeral. I guess it'll be in 2 weeks or something. I'll see
Yeah.
him then." Like, not like I must go down there and see the body and not talk to anyone on the way.
Yeah.
There's just one of Giles' powers that we don't get into, that is kind of psychic foresight, that like Chun-Li would break into the building some point later in the night. I like to think that the fact that he wasn't lying there for hours, that he heard that like Chun-Li was coming in the building and just
Oh, yeah.
ran down to the mortuary and then quickly put the cover over him.
Yeah.
Just having a snack in the corner, like, "Oh, gotta get back." Brush
But
the
then
crumbs off.
he even kept his like blood packs on too. It's not
Yes,
like he
for
would-
apparently, like, yeah, like you say, like he's had those on for like 7 or 8 hours by this stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I don't know if it's possible to get yourself all the way down to the morgue with a blood pack attachment on you without somebody looking, right? It feels like the
Yeah.
morgue is the last port of call for any body that doesn't make it. Not like we'll examine him in the morgue and make sure there's definitely no blood packs attached.
Yeah.
I do think too with Guile, which is another kind of funny part, is that the reason why Blanca gets tortured and everything that happens is because of him, because he has to yell into the screen, "Charlie, I'm coming for you," and you're like, oh, if you didn't even say that, like,
Yeah, I
nothing
did
would've
write that in my
Yeah.
notes. That it was a bad friend, Guile.
Yeah.
Charlie's just stood there like, "Oh fuck, I would be next, would I, in this lineup to fight Bison?" And
Yeah.
he's clocking my tag. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Blanca thing, like it's funny because Blanca's such an iconic Street Fighter character, and it's like how a film that is skirting on being quote unquote realistic, like how do we get to Blanca? And it's an interesting enough idea of, properly brainwashing and transforming some guy, but my God, yeah, it doesn't. I mean, it looks bad, doesn't it? Like that
Yeah.
that prosthetic and makeup look, it's just horrendous.
But then he's one of those characters. Like, there's certain characters where I don't think you necessarily need to see fight, whatever.
Mm.
But he's definitely one where there's so much build, you want to see it put into action. I don't know.
Yeah, do the electric shock
Yeah.
thing, do the
Yeah.
ball thing. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I
I think
guess
if you were going to do Blanca now, would you want it to be guy in a suit, guy in prosthetics, fully CGI? What's the best way? Because I think if you give someone like Terry Notary, like a really good action performer, motion capture performer,
Yeah.
put him in some great prosthetics, or someone who's a bit of a squat guy who can do very tight backflips. You could do it practically, but in better makeup.
I think with better makeup. I think something kind of mocap, something like the kind of like the stuff they do in the kind of newer Planet of the Apes movies kind of stuff.
Mm.
Well, and because I didn't know his backstory, so I looked it up, and Blanca's actually he's just from the jungle, is what they put. Like, he's not a science experiment or anything. So I'm wondering, if they do the new one, if they would keep with that lore or whatever.
Go back to that.
I imagine they'd want to distance themselves from this one as much as possible, right? Like, or just have a tongue-in-cheek JCVD cameo somewhere as like a different general.
Yeah.
But it does go to show like what a different era of filmmaking that was, because you say, they wanted Jean-Claude, his price tag was 8 million out of the 35 budget straight away. And it's like, people argue a lot these days that we're not in the era of movie stars anymore. And back then it was a time when a film would have a modest budget and you would blow so much of it on getting a name attached. And now it feels like, presuming you weren't getting a massive A-list name for Guile of all people, you could do a new one now with great actors, but none of them are commanding 8 million for this thing in the year of our Lord 2024. So interesting shakeup, I think.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is one of those films where like Raul Julia as Bison is great. And I think that even if you just had him, where you just have one known actor and then all the rest, that'd be fine. And even with nowadays, I think you could do the same thing. Just do the one, like, oh, here's the kind of. I mean, so many action films do that are lower on the budget scale, unless you're getting like Fast and the Furious or whatever. Which I'm mentioning all the ones that you normally do. It's got Fast and Furious and WWE references for this episode, but I'm the one who did it. But
I like to think that I'm more than just Fast and the Furious and WWE references. To be fair, like,
but it seems like they just have the one actor that the older generation knows, and then just do whoever else.
Yeah. Are there any other Street Fighter characters that aren't in this one that you'd like to see in live action? Because to be fair to this one, it is pretty much every Street Fighter 2 generation character that's in here. Like some of the later games, I have no idea once it gets past 3.
Yeah.
And I know what Street Fighter 6 was the recent one, so any new ones in that, I'd be like, okay. So there's no one that's really been missed out of the main lineup, but any others you'd like to see?
I don't know, because I think the ones that I would like to see are probably they're in it, but I'd like to see them utilized more. I guess is my big thing. Like actually seeing them fight instead of just kind of either be scientist or journalist or whoever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I think that it's there's nobody that necessarily that I feel like it's somebody else I need to see, but again, yeah, just kind of better used and and kind of more extensive fights or whatever, more kind of fun fights. But yeah, I can't no, so no, I can't think of any character that they kind of miss out from. And I know that other people are big gamers, but like this was kind of my era of Street Fighter. So like,
Yeah.
these are the generation of characters that I'm kind of aware of. So I'm not really aware of the kind of future generation, the newer characters.
Because that was always the issue I found with Mortal Kombat, in that by its very nature, people are going to get killed off because you want to fatality everybody. And it's like, oh, who does that leave for the sequel? And that's why I always thought, like, you treat the Mortal Kombat movies like it's a reality show series and you just reset, right? So each one's just a tournament and then they'll get magically resurrected, or it's a new one. So you get to like have stakes within the movie you're in of who lives and who dies. But then each one's just different and you just shake up the same cast and just bring them all back. And again, it needs less of that mindset of having stuff be interconnected all the time. Just be like, here's another Mortal Kombat film. It's like you've just put a new quid into the machine and you've got an extra, you go in the arcade. Like literally treat it like that if you want, and everyone's back, and then just go again and have different results and different stories. I mean, you could spin out like a number of them in that fun way, and then you'd each have your favorites. Each one would be very, very standalone, but you have this collection of movies. Like you don't need to have seen the last one to appreciate that one. I think it's such an open goal for financiers and studio people. Like, I don't know why they're not embracing that level of thinking, but I guess that's why I don't run a studio. So
and that's been the issue now with a lot of those Marvel movies. Like you can't watch. There's a lot of complaint among fan base or just regular moviegoers. Like, well, you can't really watch this one to truly understand it without watching this show and this movie, and because this character links here and this one links here, and
It's interesting that they didn't realize that like that was going to happen. Because it's like, because I mean the exact same thing happened in comic books. They kind of started a whole new Marvel universe, like a reset Marvel universe, which is like over 20 years old now, so it's got its own complications. But like, to get around this, I've been like, oh, you don't have to have read the whole the whole saga of Spider-Man going back to the 60s. There's these other titles and stuff like that. So like, yeah, I mean, you'd think they would have realized at a certain point that the same thing was going to happen to them, like this
Yeah.
that happened in the comic books.
It
They
seems
they
mad that they had the perfect out with Endgame as well. That was the perfect
Yeah.
capper, and then the pandemic came along and made them forced to stop anyway. And at that point, that would have been the great way of, if not rebooting everything, at least going, here's new stuff that isn't connected to the old stuff. So start again, and that's
Mhm.
as it was in the past, a very ambitious 2008 to 2019 storytelling experiment that paid off in spades. And now it's like instead, what they did instead was they just doubled down and went more stuff all the time, and it's still all connected. And now everyone's drowning a bit.
Well, and what's strange too, because I know what the X-Men movies tried it, which we're kind of getting off topic, but the X-Men movies tried it of casting. Oh, we'll just cast younger people, so that now we can do all these movies and they can age with it. Where I know Marvel, they casted a couple people where like, oh, they're already like hitting 50. Like you're only going to
Yeah.
get what 2-3 movies out of them to be this, superhero that is supposed to be running around fighting and doing all this stuff that you're hoping for a long-term goal. And
Mm-hmm.
I
that's
guess
yeah.
because maybe because the landscape is slightly different now, and like so it's very confusing for action fans of our age because a lot of people like Stallone and Lundgren and to a lesser extent Schwarzenegger and Van Damme are kind of still around, that we think of other people like a Statham as like the younger generation of action
Yeah.
stars, despite their fact they're in their mid 50s.
Yeah.
So it's become, the action landscape's become quite confusing in that sense, where we kind of lost traction of like who is actually young and who we just think
Yeah.
of as younger in
Mm-hmm.
comparison to the other people we've got still with us.
Yeah, I mean,
doing
yes,
action
Statham
movies.
is old guard now. It's just that the old guard is still around.
Yeah.
So if you look at Statham as being from like, say, Snatch onwards, like 2000 to now, that's 24 years. If you
Yeah.
put that same time frame onto Arnie, say if you look at Arnie from like 1978, even like years before Conan and Terminator, then that's Alien, into the mid 2000s, which is that's a good run, and he already was kind of past it by then. So yeah, it's mad.
Yeah, and like it's interesting, like doing this podcast because like back when we did the Stallone season, there was a lot of Stallone films where they were like questioning his age in his like mid 40s, and like he was questioning his age in his mid 40s, and people were, because people thought that was too old to be an action star, but like the whole like Liam Neeson thing in the late
Yeah,
2000s
that's
like
what did
really
it.
changed everything, and now like because quote unquote Jerry action is such a thing now,
Yeah.
that there's all these other action stars who are in their late 40s, early 50s or whatever, who we think of as younger, but they're just not.
Well, I mean, they're even still trying to this day. I don't know, it probably will never happen, but what Conan the King, Schwarzenegger coming back as Conan, and like, I mean,
Yeah, he
how
has said he's given up on that.
Okay.
though. Like he for a long time he said, oh, he wants to do that, even up until like 5 or 6 years ago. But
Okay.
like recently, he seems to have said he's kind of
Finally
given up on
done.
that. But I think that we have veered so
Yes.
far into tangential waters that that
Just
is
like the
possibly
movie.
a signifier that it is time to round up the episode and give us some final thoughts on the film Street Fighter. So starting with you, Matt, your final thoughts and final kind of grading on Street Fighter.
Yeah, so I think this is a very definite so bad it's good film. I think if you think it's so bad it's bad, you need to watch more so bad it's bad films. I think you watch this in a crowded cinema at a special screening and it'll tear the house down. I think you'll have a really fun time. And I think there is a definite difference between having a good fun time with the film and the film itself being good. They're not mutually exclusive, and this is a perfect example of that. I think it's a very ambitious, especially for its time, adaptation, ambitious action film, and ambitious comedy as well. And I think it does. I think it attempts a lot, and it's, as we've said, it's a lot in the execution, in the casting, in the tone, in the structure, in the timing, and a lot of stuff that devalues it. But this a million times over so much stuff from that sort of 2000s era. Like the 2000s, I've been saying a Daryl a lot. Like we've both been saying how it's quickly aging to be like the worst age decade for cinema because either it very much embraces its time period and it's the film we deserve in 2003, as we would say, which leans into the style at the time, the soundtrack at the time, which a few more years down the line you'll be able to look at and be like, this very much is a film from that era, and it will get its own merits will start coming back. But it's just not quite. There's so much wrong with it. So this does tap into that nice nostalgia, of a competently put together film for the most part. And when I watched it last year, I gave it 1.5. I've now upped it to 2. So it's a very beloved 2 with a heart on Letterboxd from me.
Okay. So on Letterbox, I actually was quite generous and gave it 2.5. And that is largely for Raul Julia's performance. I
Yeah.
understand this is a bad movie. Um, but and to a certain extent, I agree that it's like one of those so bad it's good. But what I would say is for people listening that there is a curve. There is a curve of so bad it's good. At the bottom of the curve, you've got films like Troll 2 and The Room and Ninja Terminator and things like that, where on every conceivable level of filmmaking, everything is incompetent. Whereas this is more at the top of the curve, whereas there's some genuinely good things about it. The production design is nice. It looks nice. The cinematography is good. The direction is okay. Raul Julia's performance is great. It's a mixed bag, but like there's many things that are wrong. Like the characters are misused. The fight scenes are often too short and not satisfying. The tone is kind of all over the place. There's a lot of things going wrong. There's a lot of things that don't work. Sometimes the humor works. Sometimes it's a little bit too goofy for its own good. Sometimes it feels like it's full blown parody, and other times it feels like it's trying to do more of an action movie thing. It's a bit of a mess for sure. But I think there's good things about it, and if you want to take anything away from this episode, is that Raul Julia, despite being in this bad movie, comes out of it as one of the most iconic and fun action movie villains of the 90s. He is essentially the reason to see this movie.
Yeah.
Like, I compare it to other performances in kind of action movies that are like this, much like Frank Langella in Masters of the Universe. He's the main reason to see that movie. Don't care about the rest of the movie, but like, yeah. So he's right up there with one of the kind of great kind of campy performances. I would also say Max von Sydow in Flash Gordon, but I would also say that Flash Gordon is I will defend to the death. So yeah, that's everything I've got to say about Street Fighter. Craig.
Yes. No, I would agree with the Raul Julia of watching that. I would also say what you were talking about, Matt, of that. I think my biggest thing was I watched it last night, and I watched it by, obviously by myself, late at night, and there was this sense of being like, I feel like I would have enjoyed this a lot more if, yeah, I had people around me, and you have a drink or you have junk food or whatever it may be. Like just really kind of that communal of watching it would be a lot of fun. Um, no, I agree. I think there's a lot of stuff that's great about it, or that just doesn't work. I respect, again, even though it doesn't work, I respect that they tried to not just make a carbon copy of the video game, that they tried something new with it. I'll always give people credit for doing that. And yeah, I guess the biggest compliment I can give in a podcast like this with some of the stuff we watch is that um it made me watching it, it made me want more instead of to just be like, just turn this off. Like you could see it and go, oh, there's something, like if they just add a little bit here, or if they like focused in on this part instead of this, like it could have been great. but but it's a lot of fun, yeah, overall.
Yeah, yeah. It's not stop or my mum will shoot, is it, Craig?
Yes. No, it's not that.
As the most popular review on Letterboxd that I can see says, God, this movie is fucking awful. Not one person in it is good. I love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a perfect review. That's a perfect review. And a perfect way to end the podcast.
Yes.
So it just leaves us to wrap up by asking you once again, Matt, to just promote your podcast and tell people where they can find it across all social media platforms.
Sure, yes. You can find all things on the Spotlight train over at Spotlight Pod, where we'll be covering some of the new Star Trek shows like Lower Deck Season 4 and Strange New World Season 2 this year we've got coming up. And then over at Is Paul Dano OK for all things Is Paul Dano OK, where by now we should be in our 9th season for that currently unknown actor Focus. So I'm very intrigued to see who that is. And then I promise everybody we will be back to Dano himself for Season 10, probably sometime during the summer or after the summer, to finish off literally the dregs of the barrel of things that he has done that we have not yet seen, and some of which are still not yet out. And then we're back on to another character after that. So there's those two pods over there, and I'm on at Matt Brothers 2 on Twitter, X as well.
And Craig, you can talk about your projects.
Yeah. Well, you can find me at Guilty Animals is the one I use on the Twitter or X or whatever it will become until who knows by the time this podcast is out.
It's me. It's coming out in May.
Okay. So yeah, by that point, who knows? Maybe Twitter won't be around anymore. But I did
Quite
Instagram. But I also do another podcast called Bloodhound Picks, PIX, where we are shifting some of the focus, but we'll talk occasionally about obscure horror films, but then talking about the process of making a horror film as a kind of independent creator. So from the writing to the trying to pitch and so on and so forth. So by May, I will actually be doing my show that I've talked about for some time now on this podcast. It's a one-person show about basically my journey through comedy, and more specifically offensive comedy, and trying to understand it through this kind of a 3-year academic journey. But I made a one-person show about it, and yeah, it'll be performed in mid-May, so which I'll record it and at some point put it online or do something with it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent. So yeah, that's the end for this episode. If you want to follow us, if you want to check us out, you can. Wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that jazz. We're also on the Last of the Action Heroes podcast network. So if you want to check us out there, or if you had checked us out there, that's very glad to have you on this 90s action train. You can follow us on social media at 90s Action on X/Twitter. We've also got a Facebook page, which has started in case X/Twitter falls into the sea, which could happen any day now. We might have a blue sky by the time this episode comes out. Who knows? Yeah. But anyway, follow us there. Thank you all very much for listening, and tune in next time.